I've talked about continents fairly regularly on this channel, and if you've really been paying attention, I'd say you're familiar with the fact that people can't seem to agree on how many of these the Earth has. In school I was taught that there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, though some of you might have been taught that there's a 6 or 6, and some people on YouTube sure seem to like talking about an 8th. So, let's discuss this in a new, more appropriate way. At least in my opinion, but before that please subscribe to my channel and don't forget other interesting videos on this channel and comment your feedback, as it means a lot for me. The term continent is rather vague, and any way we decide to divvy up land will always be a little arbitrary. But if that leaves you a little unsatisfied, don't worry, you're in good company, which is why in search of a more definitive answer to what's ultimately an unanswerable question. Some people have turned to plate tectonics, which is just kind of a mess what with all these little weird plates in between the big ones, and so on. Others have done even worse and tried to use cultures in doing so, giving themselves the impossible task of drawing straight lines through the murky divisions between groups of people. There are some absolute fools who will say screw it, let's just start from scratch and see where we get, and yet here, we are no closer to any sort of definitive answer, and honestly maybe even a little bit more confused. What if we did something really crazy and say looked at the distribution of plants and animals across the world to see if there's any way to define continents through their native biology? It just so happens that, my friends, that is the beginning of biogeography. Now, lucky for us, someone has already gone through the trouble of dividing the world into 7 biogeographic realms, many of which line up nicely to our preconceived notions of continents. Unluckily for us, in order to actually understand why these are the way that they are, we can't just look at how things are today, but rather we need to look much further back in time to see how past biology and past geography shaped our present. Biogeography, or in other words, we first need a lesson in paleobiogeography, so buckle up. While life has been found on this planet for over 3 billion years, we only need to look back 200 million years to a time when all the continents of the world had come together into a single supercontinent, Pangaea. This is an ideal time and place for us to start, because having all major landmasses physically connected allows both plant and animal species to disperse across any land freely and completely. They found suitable, briefly creating an original all-encompassing realm, the Pangaea, under which all terrestrial life was included. While the biology of the Pangaea realm may have looked vastly different from what we're used to today, it would be from this initial melting pot of a gene pool that all subsequent terrestrial life would delineate from the most recent common ancestor. So, to speak, this era of interconnectedness came to an end as the Tethys Seaway began widening, splitting the supercontinent into 2 roughly equal landmasses, Laurasia and Gondwana, sending the biota of each new continent off on their own unique evolutionary trajectory. Contained within Laurasia was North America, Europe, and most of Asia. Gondwana was a conglomerate of South America, Africa, India, Australia, and Antarctica. His point on the populations between the 2 continents effectively couldn't mix, allowing for 2 distinct biogeographic realms to emerge, the Arctic and the tropic being centered at a much higher latitude. Laurasia was periodically exposed to much lower average temperatures, placing an evolutionary pressure on the plants and animals here to develop cold, hardy bodies, or else offer extinction to any species that couldn't keep itself warm. A good example of how this pressure manifested itself would be in the pine genus, or as the fancy scientists would call the penis genus, having evolved on Laurasia some 130 million years ago. Pine trees quickly distributed themselves across the continent, which is why even if we look at a modern distribution map for pine trees, we'll see they still exhibit a Laurasia distribution, only growing in lands that once belonged to the Arctic realm. This environmental stress also affected animals, making cold-blooded species less capable of surviving here, while consequently giving warm-blooded animals like mammals the advantage. This explains why it was here that the planet witnessed a huge diversification of mammals into the Laurasia theria. A whole branch of mammals specific to Laurasia, which consists of many of the animals we're most familiar with today. Included in this development was Perissodactyla, or odd-toed undulates like horse-donkey tapirs, and Rhinoceros artiodactyla, or the even-toed ungulate, which includes even more popular animals like all camelids, pig ruminants like giraffes, deers, antelopes, cattle, sheep, goats, etc., all the way to hippopotamus and even cetaceans, Rodentia, or all rodents and carnivorous, which can be further divided into feline and canine. Try to figure out what kinds of animals fit into those categories. However, just like its predecessor, as Laurasia aged, it too began to break apart with the Central Atlantic Rift, cutting a line between Europe and Greenland, effectively splitting the Arctic realm in 2. On one side the pale Arctic, the Paleo, in reference to this being considered by many to be part of the Old World, on the other side the New Arctic, or the New World Arctic altogether. The shared natural history of these two realms explains why basically all flora and fauna across North America, a direct analog must be found across Eurasia and vice versa. This similarity in biology was only reinforced with the periodic reconnection of Asia to North America across the Bering Strait, allowing further exchange between these seemingly distant lands. 2 out of the 7 biogeographic realms. The remaining 5 all came from the breakup of Gondwana, having stayed much closer to the warmth of the equator. Evolution on Gondwana took its own path, one that was less influenced by temperature, resulting in flora and fauna better adapted to tropical climates. Hence the title tropic for this realm, and so just like how the Laurasia, the area developed on Eurasia. Here the Gondwana area began to emerge as well. Notably, it was around 70 million years ago that the first true primates evolved to somewhere in the center of Africa. By this time Gondwana had already begun splitting apart, meaning primates weren't able to fully distribute themselves and instead were only able to reach South America and India. This explains why the modern distribution of primates minus humans of course looks like this, reflecting a late Gondwanan dispersal. As Gondwana broke up even further, so too did the tropical realm. South America and Africa became the largest fragments, causing the Gondwana theria to diverge into the Xenarthra in the Afrotheria, signifying the two continents becoming their own distinct biogeographical realms, in the process the Neotropics and the Afrotropic. An assortment of common ancestors. South America ended up with animals like the sloth anteaters and the armadillo, while the Afrotheria became things like aardvark, hyraxes and tenrecs without any of the Arctic megafauna. This left room for larger herbivores to emerge from these groups, so in South America common sloths were free to speciate into the enormous ground and aquatic sloth anteaters became giant anteaters, and the armadillo family diversified into glyptodonts in Africa. The same thing happened where a relative of the hyrax started growing bigger and bigger, losing most of its hair while its nose got much longer, giving birth to the order Proboscidea. The only surviving member of which being the elephant, at one point a relative of the elephant, even began living aquatically, first staying within the shallows, presumably using its trunk as a sort of snorkel, but eventually fully adapted to the water. Speciated into Sirenia, becoming dugongs and manatees. Africa, however, never fully escaped the reach of Laurasia, having reconnected with Asia approximately 30 million years ago. This opened up the two lands for exchange, with many of the Laurasia mammals coming down into Africa, filling the continent with even and odd-toed ungulates, felines and canines and so on. Relatives of the elephants also managed to make their way into the Palearctic, adapting to the cold conditions by growing bigger and regrowing thick fur, resulting in mammoth mastodons Stegodontidae and Merotherium by using the Bering Land Bridge. These species were even able to enter the Nearctic realm, explaining how a genus originating in Africa made it all the way to North America. Overall, due to its more recent connection to Eurasia, the north of Africa has largely been colonized by species of the Palearctic. So much so, in fact, that it is now included as part of that realm, as many of the species we associate most with Africa, lions, rhinos, zebras, giraffes, hyenas, all got their evolutionary start in the Arctic realm. The Afrotropic was still partially preserved, however, thanks to the Sahara Desert retaining its primates and most of its plant species, and even produced as humans, which, as we all know, went out from the Afrotropic to extensively colonize every other realm on Earth. South America, on the other hand, remained isolated from about 80 million years ago until about 20 million years ago, when the Panamanian land bridge began to reach out from North America to join the two continents together. This kickstarted what's known as the Great American Interchange, a mixing of endemic species that continues to this day. This wasn't a fair and equal fusion. However, already mentioned prior to this recombination, North America has been sporadically reconnected to Asia through the Bering Land Bridge. This not only brought the new Arctic and the Palearctic realms temporarily back together, but later this also meant African and Indian influences reached all the way to North America. The effect of this was that only the most competitive animals prevailed across these related realms, stacking the Nearctic with far more robust species when compared to those hosted in neotropical isolation. When these two realms collided, many of the unique and specially adapted species of South America were replaced by the more generalist species of the north. Incoming undulates, like camelids, entered and evolved into llamas and alpacas. Felines came here to diversify into jaguars and cougars, and even rodentia spread from north to south, growing to sizes never attained by rodents like capybaras and maras, all the while helping to push native animals like ground sloths and glyptodonts into extinction. But this is also where the lines really start to blur, as plants don't exactly follow the same rules as animals. While Nearctic animals were more successful overall at invading the Neotropics, The tropical climate of Central America gave a localized edge to advancing neotropical plants, the result of which being plant communities of South American origin coming to dominate all the way up to Mexico. We will continue to discuss this theory in the next video, so please subscribe and hit the bell icon, so you get notification when I upload next video. Meanwhile, please check other interesting videos on the channel. Thanks for watching.